Welcome to Crossroads. Folks, the Department of Education as we knew it has now come to an end. Now, President Donald Trump issued the promised executive order to begin dismantling the department. And also in other news, DOGE, well, they got a lot more authority over USAID. And this takes place just after a federal judge ordered DOGE to stop its efforts to cut spending from the agency, and they argued it could violate the Constitution. And meanwhile as well, non-U.S. citizens almost got voting rights in New York City, but the attempt to enshrine that right into law, well, that's now gotten shut down. Also, a new campaign to get heavy metals out of baby formula has been launched by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's referring to this campaign as Operation Stork Speed. I'll be going into these topics and a whole lot more today, so let's get started. Now, first off, the Department of Education, the one we used to know, is no more. It is now something else. Rumors leading up to yesterday, were that Donald Trump was going to abolish the department in its entirety. And the official announcement did not go that far, but it is coming close. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, she detailed the changes and noted the DOE will now be much smaller and will only keep its most basic functions. Watch.
The Department of Education was founded in the 1970s, and since then we have spent more than $3 trillion at this federal bureaucracy. What has been the return on that investment for the American taxpayer? Levels that are less than ideal, less than proficient. Our children's test scores are incredibly concerning when it comes to reading rates, literacy rates, math, and science test scores. The numbers prove that, and this president is finally taking much needed action to return education to where it belongs, and that's to educators closest to students in their classrooms in their respective states.
Now, she goes on to explain the Department of Education is not going away. It will live on, but in a much smaller form than what we currently know. And she notes that Trump's executive order directs the minimization of the agency. Here's a bit more on that.
So the Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today. As you know, the president's executive order directed Linda McMahon to greatly minimize the agency. So when it comes to student loans and Pell Grants, those will still be run out of the Department of Education. But we don't need to be spending more than $3 trillion over the course of a few decades on a department that's clearly failing in its initial intention to educate our students.
Now, the big focus is going to be moving education back to the states. Your public schools are not going anywhere. A lot of the money is really not going anywhere. The DOE will still exist, much smaller again, but it'll keep some of its critical functions, according to the White House press secretary, and that will include the enforcement of civil rights laws, oversight of student loans and Pell Grants. Here's more on the changes that are happening as detailed in Trump's executive order titled Improving Education Outcomes by Empowering Parents, States, and Communities. It says this, the official order from the White House, quote, unfortunately, the experiment of controlling American education through federal programs and dollars and the unaccountable bureaucracy those programs and dollars support has plainly failed our children, our teachers, and our families. And it states closing the Department of Education would provide children and their families the opportunity to escape that system that, in failing them, and it says today Americans reading the math scores that they're near historic lows. And its closure of the Department of Education would drastically improve program implementation in higher education. The Department of Education currently manages a student loan debt portfolio of more than $1.6 trillion. This means the federal student aid program is roughly the size of one of the nation's largest banks, Wells Fargo. But although Wells Fargo has more than 200,000 employees, the Department of Education has fewer than 1,500 in its Office of Federal Student Aid. The Department of Education is not a bank, and it must return bank functions to an entity equipped to serve America's students. It says the Secretary of Education shall, to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return authority over education to the states and local communities while ensuring effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. Now, in terms of the official executive order, Trump signed that yesterday. That was in the afternoon. He also gave a few words on the decision, including saying that he hopes the current Secretary of Education, Lena McMahon, will be the last ever Secretary of Education. Watch.
Today we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. And it sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education, we're going to eliminate it. And everybody knows it's right. And the Democrats know it's right, and I hope they're going to be voting for it because ultimately it may come before them. But everybody knows it's right, and we have to get our children educated. We're not doing well with the world of education in this country, and we haven't for a long time. And we're pleased to be joined today by the woman who I chose because she's an extraordinary person. And hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon.
It's going to be interesting to see just how drastically education levels actually change in the U.S. when these moves take effect. But we will wait and see, right? Now, in other news, DOGE got a lot more authority over USAID, with a DOGE official now being appointed to a leadership position at the aid organization. This takes place just after a federal judge said, well, DOGE has to stop its efforts to cut spending from USAID because it could violate the Constitution. And the decision to just bypass this order, it works by giving DOGE more direct control. It actually could just sidestep the whole thing. Now, first off, here's what happened with the judge. New York Post said, a federal judge ruled Tuesday that President Trump's right-hand man, Elon Musk, likely acted unconstitutionally with his directive to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and block the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, from making further cuts. Maryland U.S. District Judge Theodore Chuang imposed a preliminary injunction ordering the Trump administration to restore email and computer access to all employees at USAID, including those who were placed on administrative leave. And it's that Chuang, who was nominated to the federal bench by former President Barack Obama, also broadly restricted Musk and DOGE from taking actions against USAID without express authorization from an official at the agency. And it says this, quote, the court finds that that defendants' unilateral actions to shut down USAID likely violated the United States Constitution. Chuang wrote, it says, in a blistering 68-page ruling, given the White House 7 days to confirm in writing that email and computer access was restored to USAID employees. So what do? They're told they have to basically just turn the whole thing back on. They don't have the right to go against it. The important line in that legal ruling is that if DOGE is going to continue these actions to cut spending at USAID, then it needs, quote, express authorization from an official at the agency. And they found a way to do that instead of following the order. It seems that's exactly what has now happened, and then some, actually. Because remember, USAID has now been placed under the State Department. That makes Secretary of State Marco Rubio the acting director of USAID as well. And Marco Rubio has now taken some direct actions in line with the judge's order. According to an email obtained by AP, it says a senior official at DOGE has been appointed to a top role at USAID. AP said this. A senior official at Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is taking a leadership role at the U.S. Agency for International Development, according to an email obtained by the Associated Press, giving DOGE a top job at an agency that it has helped to dismantle. Jeremy Lewin, who has played a central role in DOGE's government-cutting efforts at USAID and other federal agencies, becomes at least the second DOGE lieutenant to be appointed to a top job at an agency during the Trump administration. It says this, Pete Morocco, a Trump administration political appointee who is serving as deputy head of USAID, disclosed the change in an email Tuesday to State Department staff. And it says, It comes after Morocco and DOGE oversaw the gutting of 83% of USAID contracts, shifting the remaining programs under the State Department. Morocco said in his email that he will serve as the State Department's Director of Foreign Assistance. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce on Wednesday confirmed his appointment, and she told reporters it was an indispensable role in aligning all U.S. government foreign assistance with the president's priorities. Now, further in with this, folks, again, we'll see what happens with DOGE, but also speaking of DOGE, the Department of Defense is also seeing some pretty large cuts, and this includes over 20,000 employees who are now approved to resign from the DOD. Common Defense said the Pentagon officially approved nearly 21,000 employee resignations as part of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's sweeping initiative to reduce the military's civilian workforce by 5 to 8%. Now, it's a significant downsizing effort aimed at trimming between 50,000 and 70,000 personnel as part of a broader campaign to improve government efficiency and operational costs, according to a senior U.S. defense official. And notes the approved resignations represent one of the 3 primary methods being utilized to achieve the workforce reduction goals. They are reducing the workforce at the Department of Defense. Now, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth followed this up with another announcement, and he says the Pentagon is cutting wasteful spending. And he also detailed why some of these cuts are being made in the first place. Watch.
So today, I'm signing a memo directing the termination of over $580 million in DOD contracts and grants that do not match the priorities of this president or this department. In other words, they are not a good use of taxpayer dollars. Ultimately, that's who funds us, and we owe you transparency and making sure we're using it well. So here's quickly what we're canceling today. There's an HR software effort that was supposed to take a year and cost $36 million, but instead it's taken 8 years and is currently $280 million over budget, not delivering what it was supposed to. So that's 780% over budget. We're not doing that anymore. Number 2, another batch of DOD grants, $360 million worth this time. Decarbonizing emissions from Navy ships, part of the Obama-Biden green agenda, that's $6 million. $5.2 million on something that would diversify and engage the Navy by engaging underrepresented BIPOC students and scholars. Another $9 million at a university to approach equitable AI and machine learning models. I need lethal machine learning models, not equitable machine learning models. And number 3, in our ongoing effort to cut wasteful spending on external consulting services, when you add it all up, $580 million in DOD contracts and grants, DOGE is helping us cut today. What does that bring our total number up? Total cuts, running total, $800 million in wasteful spending canceled over the first few weeks as DOD partners with DOGE here to make sure that our warfighters have what they need by cutting the waste, fraud, and abuse. They're working hard.
Now, on a side note, videos like this, they're actually becoming more common with the Trump administration. They're starting to use videos on announcements to basically bypass a legacy media. And it seems kind of like the same concept that Donald Trump had during his first term in office. He said he was using social media to speak directly with voters. And this takes out the middlemen, which, in this case is mostly the legacy media. It also means helping eliminate some issues with quotes being taken out of context, a big problem they've faced and still face, or information being twisted to fit different narratives. Now look, with the Department of Defense overall though, it appears that Trump's agenda is to make the U.S. military stronger. For example, he has new programs to, build ships and so on. And recruitment efforts are also getting back on track. But the argument with the cuts, it seems to be that there is a lot of waste and unnecessary spending. They overpay for a lot of things. There are also long-running allegations the Pentagon kind of gets ripped off on a lot of contracts. So it does seem that these issues are being addressed, at least to an extent. Now look, on a different topic, the Department of Justice has now charged 3 individuals for attacks on Tesla properties. Here's the official announcement. The Justice Department says this, quote, Today, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced charges against 3 individuals responsible for the violent destruction of Tesla properties. All 3 defendants will face the full force of the law for using Molotov cocktails to set fire to Tesla cars and charging stations. And they say, quote, "The days of committing crimes without consequence have ended." That's according to Attorney General Pam Bondi, and she adds, "Let this be a warning. If you join this wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla properties, the Department of Justice will put you behind bars." Now, notes one defendant, also armed with a suppressed AR-15 rifle, was arrested after throwing approximately 8 Molotov cocktails at a Tesla dealership located in Salem, Oregon. Another was arrested in Loveland, Colorado, after attempting to light Teslas on fire with Molotov cocktails. The defendant was later found in possession of materials used to produce additional incendiary weapons. In Charleston, South Carolina, a 3rd defendant wrote profane messages against President Trump around Tesla charging stations before lighting the charging stations on fire with Molotov cocktails. It notes each defendant faces serious charges carrying a minimum penalty of 5 years and up to 20 years in prison. The Department of Justice, it says, is committed to ending all acts of violence and arson directed at Tesla properties and otherwise. Now, look, the arrests, they follow public statements as well from Attorney General Pam Bondi that the attacks are a form of domestic terrorism. And she also noted the Department of Justice will be investigating not only the people doing these things directly, but also any sources that are encouraging or funding these attacks, meaning anyone puppeteering these things, they're going to get charged as well, maybe. Also, along with this, there are growing questions over the level of support for what could be labeled as acts of domestic terrorism. A clip from Comedy Central's The Daily Show with Jordan Klepper has been making rounds online as well, where commenters are noting that in-studio audiences are actually cheering for the arson and the attacks. Here's a clip of that. Watch.
And some people are not content to just scream about Elon in a high school gym. They're taking to the streets or the parking lots.
Tonight, the FBI and ATF now investigating multiple cases of possible arson targeting Teslas and Cybertrucks.
This dramatic video shows multiple cars in flames. Police say the attacker used Molotov cocktails. It's the latest in more than a dozen instances of arson and vandalism targeting Tesla.
The same suspect shot more Teslas with a gun. Tesla Cybertrucks were set on fire in Kansas City, and earlier this month, shots fired at a Tesla dealership in Oregon. Cybertrucks on fire in Seattle.
Wow, you guys like petty acts of domestic terrorism, huh? Cool. Wow. Okay.
With that said, it's not clear whether the audience in that clip actually represents the majority of people. And also, look, sometimes shows like this, they encourage the audience to cheer or boo for different segments. They have the, applause light go off or something. But look, it's actually not clear if that's what took place. We don't really know. But Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri weighed in on the incidents as well, and he noted that what's now being seen with the arson attacks and other calls for violence and so on, it's not anything new, not for the far left at least. He notes this is an unfortunate trend we've seen in the country from the far left for a very long time. And he even compares it to the Weather Underground attacks in the 1970s. That was a communist terrorist organization, the Weather Underground, that was active in the United States. Now, he said this in a series of posts. In 1971, the Weather Underground, a far-left terrorist group, actually bombed the Capitol building, planting an explosive device in a ground-floor bathroom. In 1983, another left-wing militant group called the Armed Resistance Unit detonated a bomb outside the Senate chamber. And 18 months from 1971 to 72, we had 2,500 domestic bombings, more than 5 a day. He said, but most Americans don't remember this. Why? Well, we hear everything about J6 and so on. Why don't we hear about this when the left was actually bombing the country? He says, well, because the left controls the schools, the press, the whole system of organized culture, so it's been erased from our popular memory. He said, we've seen the same thing with the Tesla attacks today. Most respectable voices on the left won't go so far as to outright endorse the violence, of course, but they'll distract, equivocate, and soft pedal it. And he gives some examples of news outlets and public figures, major ones, who are making excuses for the attacks, some encouraging them, making, shows, applauding them, and so on. And in some cases, people who even seem to just openly endorse them. Now, folks, in other news, non-U.S. citizens almost got voting rights in New York City. But the attempt to enshrine that into law, well, it's now gotten shut down by a pretty good margin. The Big Apple's controversial law, it says, according to the New York Post, allowing non-citizens to vote in city elections was struck down by the state's highest court Thursday. The New York Court, it said, of Appeals ruled 6-1, major ruling, that the law passed by the City Council in late 2021 violated the state constitution. Here's a quote. It says, whatever the future may bring, the New York Constitution as it stands today draws a firm line restricting voting to citizens. The opinion states you have to be a citizen to vote in our elections. Now, notes further in, the ruling closes the matter in the state courts and dashes hopes by many lefty city council members and advocates of the city's 800,000 green card holders getting a voice in local elections. Imagine that. 800,000 green card owners getting to vote in New York City. Now, note supporters had argued that non-citizens were legally should be able to vote because they pay taxes and make contributions to their communities. But Republicans and other opponents viewed the law as a non-starter, especially because the Constitution appeared to clearly limit voting to U.S. citizens. Imagine that. You have to be part of the country to vote. Now, look, folks. 800,000 green card holders almost got the right to vote in New York elections. The problem we have with voting populations also is that if you have elected officials, well, they need to cater to voters. If you change the voters, you change what they represent. And when you give voting rights to people who are not American citizens, they can, any issue basically they care about will start showing up in law. Maybe they want to bring their whole family here. Well, that's a great idea. Maybe they want free houses and free cars, like many of them got. Maybe they'll vote for that. But that being said, it got shut down in New York City by a very strong degree. Again, a 6-1 vote. And look, we'll see if they keep pushing for it. There are groups across the country trying to do this very actively. They want voting rights even for illegal immigrants. But the very solid defeat of this bill could mark the end of it, at least for a while, and at least in New York City. That said, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please share this episode, helps get the word out. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.